Welcome to my channel. My name's Jolie, and this is the series where we read A Course in Miracles. Today is lesson 72, and it will be on pages 122, 123, and 124. So let's get started, and here we go. Lesson 72, quote, holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Again, holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. While we have recognized that the ego's plan for salvation is the opposite of God's, we have not yet emphasized that it is an active attack on God's plan and a deliberate attempt to destroy it. In the attack, the God of your understanding is assigned to the attributes which are actually associated with the ego, while the ego appears to take on the attributes of God. The ego's fundamental wish is to replace God. In fact, the ego is the physical embodiment of that wish. For it is that wish that seems to surround the mind with the body, keeping it separate and alone and unable to reach other minds except through the body that was made to imprison it. The limit on communication cannot be the best means to expand communication, yet the ego would have you believe that it is. Although the attempt to keep the limitation that the body would impose is obvious here, it is perhaps not so apparent why holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. But let us consider the kinds of things you are apt to hold grievances for. Are they not always associated with something a body does? A person says something you do not like. A person does something that displeases you. A person betrays hostile thoughts in their behavior. You are not dealing here with that. You are not dealing here with what the person is. On the contrary, you are exclusively concerned with what the person does in a body. You are doing more than failing to help in freeing the people from the body's limitations. You are actively trying to hold them to it by confusing it with them and judging them as one. Herein is God attacked. For if God's son, daughter, people are only a body, so must God be as well. A creator wholly unlike his creation, a creator wholly unlike their creation is inconceivable. If God is a body, what must God's plan be for salvation? What could it be but death? In trying to present God as the author of life and not of death. God is a liar and a deceiver, full of false promises, offering illusions in place of truth. The body's apparent reality makes this view of God quite convincing. In fact, if the body were real, it would be difficult indeed to escape this conclusion. And every grievance that you hold insists that the body is real. It overlooks entirely what your brother, sister is. It reinforces your belief that they are a body and condemns them for it. And it asserts that our salvation must be death, projecting this attack onto God and holding God responsible for it. To this carefully prepared arena, where angry animals seek for prey and mercy cannot enter, the ego comes to save you. God made you a body. Very well. Let us accept this and be glad. As a body, do not let yourself be deprived of what the body offers. Take the little you can get. God gave you nothing. The body is your only savior. It is the death of God and your salvation. This is the universal belief of the world you see. Some hate the body and try to hurt and humiliate it. Others love the body and try to glorify and exalt it. But while the body stands at the center of your concept of yourself, you are attacking God's plan for salvation and holding your grievances against God and God's creation, that you may not hear the voice of truth and welcome it as friend. Your chosen Savior takes God's place instead. It is your friend. God is your enemy. We will try today to stop these senseless attacks on salvation. We will try to welcome it instead. Your upside down perception has been ruinous to your peace of mind. You have seen yourself in a body and the truth outside you, locked away from your awareness by the body's limitations. Now we are going to try to see this differently. The light of truth is in us, where it was placed by God. It is the body that is outside us and not our concern. To be without a body is to be in our natural state. To recognize the light of truth in us is to recognize ourselves as well as we are. To see ourself as separate from the body is to end the attack on God's plan for salvation and to accept it instead. And wherever God's plan is accepted, is it accomplished already? Our goal in the longer practice periods today is to become aware that God's plan for salvation has already been accomplished in us. We are therefore attacking what we do not recognize. Now we are going to try to lay judgment aside and ask what God's plan for us is. Quote, "What is salvation, dear God? I do not know. Tell me that I may understand. What is salvation, dear God? I do not know. Tell me that I may understand." Then we will wait in quiet for God's answer. We have attacked God's plan for salvation without waiting to hear what it is. We have shouted our grievances so loudly that we have not listened to God's voice. We have used our grievances to close our eyes and stop our ears. Now we would see and hear and learn. What is salvation, God? Ask and you will be answered. Seek and you will find. We are no longer asking the ego what salvation is and where to find it. We're asking it of truth. Be certain then that the answer will be true because of whom you ask. Whenever you feel your confidence wane and your hope of success flicker and go out, repeat your question and your request, remembering that you are asking of the infinite creator of infinity, who created you like God's self. Quote, "What is salvation, dear God? I do not know. Tell me that I may understand." He will answer. God will answer. She will answer. Be determined to hear. One or perhaps two shorter practice periods, an hour, will be enough for today, since they will be somewhat longer than usual. These exercises should begin with this. Quote, "Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Let me accept it instead. What is salvation, dear God?" Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Let me accept it instead. What is salvation, dear God? Then wait a minute or so in silence, preferably with your eyes closed, and listen for God's answer. Lesson 72. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation.